Hey guys, tonight we step into the shadowed woods of Connecticut, where a forgotten village waits in silence. The name is Dudleytown. Maybe you've heard it whispered in a late-night conversation, or buried in an internet forum about cursed places you should never visit. But if you haven't, don't worry. By the end of tonight, you'll know why people call it one of the most haunted, most sinister towns in all of America. The forest around you feels wrong. The trees lean too close, blocking out the sky, and the air is thicker than you'd expect. People say silence is peaceful, but here it isn't. Here the silence has weight, as if sound itself has been pushed out by something older, something patient. You feel your stomach twist. If you were standing here in the dark, you probably wouldn't survive the night. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's get on with tonight's journey. You arrive in Dudleytown not as a tourist, not as someone looking to take pictures and post them online, but as a wanderer stumbling through the woods of northwest Connecticut. The trail is unmarked, no road signs guide you, and GPS cuts out the deeper you go. All you have is the sense that something waits at the end. The forest closes in around you, and the ground is uneven with stone and root. It doesn't take long before you realize this is not the kind of place where life wants to grow. What makes Dudleytown different from any other abandoned settlement? At first glance, nothing. Dozens of ghost towns exist across America, most left behind for economic reasons. Mines dried up, rivers shifted, railroads bypassed them. But Dudleytown? It was never a bustling city or a hub of commerce. It was a cluster of families drawn to farmland in the 1740s. Yet somehow, in less than a century, tragedy after tragedy piled up so thick that the very land became synonymous with doom. You push deeper, and the path narrows. Every sound is amplified, the snap of a twig, the brush of branches. There's no highway hum in the distance, no signs of modern life. Just your own footsteps, too loud, reminding you that you shouldn't be here. Locals warn against it, not in the friendly, you'll get lost kind of way, but in the serious, cold tone of people who know better. They tell stories of people who came here curious, laughing at the legends, and left with nightmares that clung to them for the rest of their lives. Some never left at all, and it all begins with a family name, Dudley. The Dudleys arrived in the colonies carrying a shadow that stretched back to England. Rumor says they were cursed, descendants of a noble line tangled in betrayal, execution, and disgrace. Whether you believe in generational curses or not, something followed them here. In this forest, they tried to start over, carving farmland from rocky soil. But the land resisted them. The soil was poor, thin, barely able to grow crops. Neighbors struggled too, but the Dudleys seemed to bear the brunt of misfortune. You walk past where one farmhouse used to stand. The stones of the foundation are still there, moss-covered and cracked, just outlines of what once was. Imagine children laughing inside, a fire burning in the hearth. But the story doesn't end with warmth. Families here were marked by sickness that came suddenly, deaths that seemed cruelly timed, and worse, episodes of madness. Men and women losing their minds in the isolation, convinced shadows stalked them at night. It wasn't long before whispers began. The Dudleys brought their curse across the ocean, and it had rooted itself in this soil. You pause, listening. The forest around you doesn't move. Not a bird call, not an insect. Just stillness. That is, when you understand what explorers and thrill-seekers have said for decades. This silence isn't tea ordinary. It's thick, smothering, almost calculated. The deeper you go, the more you feel watched. By the late 1800s, Dudleytown was a ghost. Houses collapsed, farms reverted to forest, and maps erased its name. But legends don't vanish as quickly as buildings. The stories spread, generation to generation, of a cursed town where tragedy piled up so high it crushed the community. By the 20th century, Dudleytown wasn't just forgotten farmland. It was a place of warning. And tonight, as you walk further, you'll see why. Every cursed town has layers. There's the official history, the things written down in documents, land deeds, census records, family trees. And then there's the folklore, the rumors, the fireside stories, the shivers in the dark. Dudleytown is made of both, woven together so tightly you can't pull them apart. Some say the curse is real, that spirits walk here, punishing anyone who enters. Others argue it's all coincidence, the result of poor soil, hard lives, and the paranoia of isolation. But as you stand here, where so many lives broke apart, you don't need proof of ghosts to feel the curse. The place itself radiates unease, as if the land remembers. Some paranormal investigators say the energy here is so strong their equipment fails. Batteries drain, compasses spin, static erupts in microphones. Skeptics laugh, but then they come, and even they admit the woods don't feel right. One thing is certain, Dudleytown doesn't let you leave unchanged. And this is just the beginning. Because the further you walk into its history, the darker it becomes. This, here, is where the story starts. You've stepped into Dudleytown. You've felt the silence, the heavy air, the sense of being watched. Ahead of you are centuries of tragedy, whispers of curses, and shadows that stretch across generations. Now take another step forward. The story of Dudleytown is waiting for you. You take that step deeper into the forest, and with it, you step deeper into the Dudley curse. If the story of Dudleytown feels unsettling now, wait until you learn where the shadow first began, across an ocean, long before the first foundation stones were laid in this rocky soil. The curse, people say, didn't begin in Connecticut. It began in England, with a noble family whose name carried both pride and ruin. The Dudleys were not obscure farmers or faceless peasants. They were a dynasty entangled in the politics and betrayals of Tudor England. In the 16th century, the Dudleys rose close to power. Too close, perhaps. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was a towering figure in the court of Edward VI. His ambition reached so far that he placed his daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, on the throne, if only for 9 short days. 9 days. That's all it took for the Dudleys' ambitions to unravel. Mary Tudor seized the crown, Lady Jane was executed, and the Dudleys fell from grace in a torrent of betrayal and blood. John Dudley himself was beheaded for treason, his family splintered, his descendants marked by disgrace. And it's from this moment that whispers of a curse began. Imagine you're standing in a great hall, banners torn down, voices hushed as the axe falls. Families carry scars like this across generations, even if you don't believe in curses. Shame, ruin, and loss can follow bloodlines like shadows. And when some of those descendants crossed the Atlantic, settling in the New World, they carried not just their name, but the weight of those old whispers. Now, picture the first Dudleys arriving in Connecticut around the mid-1700s. They settle in a valley near Cornwall, a spot that promises farmland but offers mostly rocks and thin soil. It's not fertile, not generous, but they build anyway. Foundations are laid, wood is cut, families multiply. And at first, it seems like any other town. But soon, the tragedies pile up. Neighbors begin to notice patterns. A man falls into despair and madness, muttering about shadows moving at the edges of his fields. A woman loses her children to illness that sweeps through too fast to be natural. Livestock die without explanation. Crops wither even in good years. One by one, people start saying the same thing. It's the Dudleys. They brought the curse with them. You can almost imagine being one of those neighbors. Every town had its share of hardships, but here they feel sharper, crueler. When bad luck strikes repeatedly, human minds look for patterns, for causes. And when one family carries a name already haunted by disgrace, it's easy to stitch them into the story of misfortune. But the Dudley curse isn't just about farming failures or childhood fevers. It's about madness. Over and over, records whisper of settlers losing their grip on reality. Perfectly ordinary men and women become convinced they're stalked by shadows, haunted by something in the trees. They hear voices no one else can hear. They refuse to leave their cabins at night. Some vanish into the woods and never return. And as you walk through the remains of Dudleytown today, you notice something curious. The forest has reclaimed everything. Unlike other abandoned villages where chimneys still stand or barns collapse in slow motion, Dudleytown looks erased. The cellars remain, pits filled with moss and stone, but the houses themselves are gone, as though they were swallowed. It's as if the land didn't just accept their departure, it demanded it. Imagine crouching by one of those cellar holes, hand on cool stone. You wonder about the family who lived there. Did they eat dinner by candlelight, only to hear footsteps outside when no one was near? Did they lie awake at night listening for the creak of a door, the murmur of a voice that wasn't real? Did they slowly unravel, generation by generation, until the town dissolved under the weight of its own fear? The curse legend stretches further. Some stories claim Dudley descendants carried the curse wherever they went, not just here. Misfortune, madness, and death followed them, like a relentless echo. You might laugh this off, but when you're standing in a silent forest where even the birds refuse to sing, laughter dries up fast. Skeptics will say there was no curse. The soil was poor, farming was hard, disease common. Isolated settlements always risked inbreeding, malnutrition, and psychological strain. That's enough to explain the madness, the deaths, the exodus. Rationally, they're right. But legends survive not because they're true, but because they feel true. And in Dudleytown, every shadow, every tragedy, every silence gave shape to the legend of the curse. The Dudleys tried to build a town here. Instead, they built a cautionary tale. As you take another step along the trail, the forest seems to breathe around you. You remember what people have said? It isn't the buildings that make Dudleytown cursed, it's the land itself. And the family who brought their shadow across the ocean gave that land a story it would never shake. In the next stretch of the path, you'll see how this cursed beginning grew into the bones of a community, one that seemed doomed from the start. The trail bends, and suddenly the trees thin just enough for you to see the outline of where a clearing once stood. You stop there, sensing this was the heart of Dudleytown, the place where the community tried to knit itself together against the odds. It's hard to imagine now, with the forest thick and greedy, but long ago there were homes here, smoke curling from chimneys, the rhythmic chop of axes, children chasing each other along muddy paths. You kneel, brushing aside leaves and moss. Beneath your fingers, stone foundations emerge, the skeletons of farmhouses. They're shallow now, filled with dirt, but they whisper of the people who believed they could make a life here. Dudleytown wasn't founded with a curse in mind. It was built with hope. The Dudleys and their neighbors wanted what every settler wanted: land, security, a future. Picture yourself standing in that first gathering. The men with hands calloused from clearing rocky soil, women with aprons already stained from work, children carrying water from a creek that once flowed stronger than it does today. These weren't villains, weren't monsters. They were ordinary families with extraordinary misfortune waiting just out of sight. The founding of Dudleytown in the mid-1700s was unremarkable by colonial standards. Families claimed plots, divided land, cut trees, and tried to coax crops from the stubborn earth. The soil here was never good. Thin, acidic, strewn with stone, it fought every effort to grow corn or wheat. Clearing fields was backbreaking work, and keeping them fertile was nearly impossible. But settlers were stubborn, and they managed, barely. And then came the stories. You can almost hear the whispers carried from cabin to cabin as the first tragedies arrived. A child sickens overnight and is gone by morning. A horse panics for no reason, thrashing until it breaks its leg. A man, perfectly sane the day before, begins rambling about figures at the tree line and shadows moving through his fields. When the first Dudley settlers came here, they brought not just their lineage, but their name. That name carried weight, and neighbors remembered it. A cursed family, people muttered. a family marked by disgrace and blood in England. And when strange things began to happen in the little settlement, who else could they blame? You imagine standing in the middle of this clearing at dusk, a lantern in your hand. The cabins glow with firelight, but beyond the circle of warmth, the forest presses in. The settlers must have felt it too, that sense of being watched, of living on borrowed land that resisted them. It wasn't long before death seemed to make itself comfortable here. Accidents were common in any colonial town, but in Dudleytown they piled up in ways that felt personal. A farmer falls from his own roof, snapping his neck. A young wife loses 3 infants in succession, each to strange fevers. A hunter vanishes into the woods, never seen again. And in the middle of it all stood the Dudleys. Each time, neighbors glanced their way. Was it their curse, spreading through the town? Or was it simply the cruel mathematics of isolation, small communities magnifying every tragedy? The Dudleys themselves did not escape misfortune. Records tell of family members losing land, falling into debt, suffering illnesses that struck fast and mercilessly. They weren't powerful landowners here. They were struggling like everyone else, maybe harder. Yet the legends insist their presence poisoned the town. You walk a little farther and find another cellar hole. The walls lean inward, filled with damp leaves, but you can still imagine the house that once rose above it. At its hearth, a woman might have prayed each night for safety. Perhaps she begged for the curse to pass her family by. But curses aren't bargains you can make. This is what haunts Dudleytown's story. It wasn't abandoned all at once. It unraveled slowly, like thread pulled from cloth. Each tragedy chipped away at the community until the place was more memory than reality. And it all started here, in the founding, when settlers built homes on rocky ground and trusted a name that was already heavy with shadows. You stand up, brushing dirt from your hands. Around you, the forest has swallowed almost everything, but if you listen closely, you can hear the echoes, the axe hitting wood, the murmur of neighbors sharing news, the faint laughter of children. Those echoes are faint because they didn't last long. Dudleytown's foundation was never stable, not in soil, not in spirit, and the curse, whether real or imagined, seeped into every corner. From here, the story grows darker, because as families rooted themselves, the tragedies multiplied until Dudleytown wasn't just unlucky, it was marked, and soon even survival would no longer be possible. The path before you dips into a shallow valley, and you can almost see where a lane once cut between cabins. The forest has reclaimed it now, but the ground still remembers the shape of human footsteps. Here is where Dudleytown's story begins to bleed with sorrow, where the tragedies stop being scattered incidents and begin to pile so high they crush the memory of every happy moment. You pause, leaning against a tree, and picture the faces of those families who lived here. Their eyes must have carried a permanent weariness, not only from hard labor but from grief itself. Because in Dudleytown, grief was not occasional, it was constant. Take, for example, Gershon Hollister. He was working one day for William Tanner, a neighbor, when tragedy struck. Gershon fell and died in what seemed like a sudden accident. It was the kind of death that would make any small town uneasy, but in Dudleytown, accidents always felt heavier, more sinister, as if the land itself demanded a sacrifice. Not long after, Tanner himself began to report strange visions. He spoke of shadowy figures lurking in the woods, of whispers that rose at night when no one was near. Neighbors wrote it off as grief or madness, but the story lingered. And here, standing where his home may have been, you can almost imagine what he saw, a silhouette too tall, too still, just beyond the tree line. Then there was the Carter family. Their lives were torn apart when lightning struck suddenly, taking lives in an instant. Neighbors were stunned, such violence from the sky, aimed so precisely at one home. Was it random, or was it another notch in the curse's tally? As you walk further, you feel the oppressive silence deepen, and with it comes the weight of more stories. One woman, young, newly married, watched her husband vanish into the woods, never to return. Search parties scoured the forest, but no trace was found. She stayed in Dudleytown for a time, waiting, but eventually left, unable to bear the empty cabin and the endless questions. Another story whispers of children, healthy one day, fevered the next, gone before morning. Colonial medicine was fragile, and death often came quick, but in Dudleytown it seemed relentless. Family after family lost children, and the laughter that once echoed in the clearing grew faint, then silent. Perhaps the cruelest tragedies were those of madness. Men who had worked the land for decades suddenly lost touch with reality. They would shout in the night, claiming voices told them to leave. Some spoke of seeing ghostly forms, faces at their windows, shadows moving across their fields. And in a place already branded with whispers of a curse, madness felt less like illness and more like proof. You reach another cellar hole and peer into its mossy darkness. Imagine this. A father sits here by the fire, his face haggard, his eyes hollow. His family is gone, children dead, wife lost to sickness. Neighbors keep their distance now, whispering about the curse. The man mutters about shadows, about eyes staring from the tree line. Then one night, he vanishes. His cabin is found empty, a meal half eaten on the table. He is never seen again. Tragedy after tragedy. That's the rhythm of Dudleytown. Not one grand disaster, not a single plague or raid or famine. No, here it was a slow bleed, a steady unraveling. Death by death, madness by madness. The town lost its lifeblood. You think about what that must have done to the survivors. Imagine the dread that lived in their bones, the feeling that every sunrise could bring another loss. It must have been unbearable. And yet they stayed as long as they could, clinging to what little they had. Until even that slipped away. And through it all, the curse loomed larger. Every death, every disappearance, every flicker of madness only reinforced the story. The Dudleys, people said, had brought ruin across the sea. And now the entire town was paying the price. By the early 1800s, Dudleytown was a place of whispered dread. Families were dwindling, farms collapsing, the soil refusing to yield. Neighbors in nearby towns avoided the valley, speaking of it only in hushed tones. And the settlers who remained must have wondered if they'd made a mistake building here at all. You take a deep breath. The forest smells damp and earthy, but under it, you sense something else. Like old smoke, like ash. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe it's the town itself, still exhaling centuries of sorrow. This is where Dudleytown's legend begins to crystallize. Not just a cursed family, but an entire community trapped in a cycle of ruin. And as you move forward, you begin to see how that cycle didn't end with simple tragedy. It evolved into vanishing so complete they turned Dudleytown into a ghost before anyone realized it. The path bends deeper into the trees, and you feel the shift. The air grows denser, quieter, as though the forest itself is leaning closer to hear you breathe. Here, in the heart of Dudleytown, the stories of disappearance take hold. Tragedy is one thing. Death can be explained. But when people vanish without a trace, the mind spirals into darker questions. You pause at the edge of another depression in the earth, the foundation of a home long gone. The cellar stones peek out beneath tangled roots, as if the ground is trying to swallow every reminder that life once thrived here. You crouch down, brush aside leaves, and imagine what it must have felt like to watch someone step out the door and simply never return. One of the earliest vanishings still clings to the memory of this place. A man, neighbors knew him as Nathaniel, went hunting in the woods, a routine trip that should have lasted a few hours. His rifle was found leaning against a tree days later, but Nathaniel himself was gone. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just absence. Searchers combed the valley, calling his name into the endless trees, but the forest answered with silence. Another tale speaks of a mother who went out to gather herbs. She told her children she would return before sunset. By nightfall, they were alone in the cabin. By morning, she had not returned. Neighbors organized a search, and for days lanterns bobbed through the dark, men calling her name. She was never found. The children were sent to live with relatives, and her cabin crumbled into ruin. And then there are the more chilling accounts, the ones that leave you wondering if what disappeared was not just bodies, but sanity. One man claimed his wife had been taken by figures in the shadows. He insisted he had seen them drag her into the forest, their shapes blacker than the night. No one else believed him, and within weeks, he too vanished, leaving his cabin abandoned, his fields overgrown. You straighten up, brushing dirt from your hands, and scan the tree line. The forest stands unmoving, but it's easy to see how fear can grow here. Shadows stretch long, the silence pressing in, until every sound, every snap of a twig, feels like something watching. It wasn't only settlers who told of such vanishings. Later, when the town had already started to fade, visitors spoke of strange experiences. Hikers wandering the trails swore they lost hours, even days, with no memory of where they'd gone. One man claimed he had seen paths that weren't there before, leading him deeper until he realized he had no idea how to get back. You take another step forward, the crunch of leaves underfoot loud in the stillness, and you think about the strange pull of this valley. How many people stepped into the woods with ordinary tasks in mind, only to dissolve into legend? In other towns, a disappearance might become an isolated story. Here in Dudleytown, it became a pattern. The vanishings cemented the curse. Locals in neighboring towns whispered warnings. Don't go there. Don't stray too far into those trees. People don't come back. And slowly, Dudleytown began to die. Not only because the soil was poor or the farms failed, but because the people themselves seemed to fade away. By the mid-1800s, Dudleytown was already turning ghost-like. Families abandoned cabins, leaving behind tools, possessions, sometimes even furniture as though they had left in a hurry. Neighbors who passed through spoke of the uncanny quiet, of empty windows staring out from darkened cabins. It was as if the town itself had decided to erase its people, one by one. And yet, even as it emptied, the curse's reputation grew. Travelers and storytellers carried the tales to nearby villages, and from there, the legend spread wider. Dudleytown was no longer just a settlement. It was a warning, a riddle. How could so many vanish, so many suffer in one isolated valley? You walk on, and the trees seem to close tighter around the path. The forest is thick, old, alive in ways you can't quite name. You imagine those who vanished, stepping where you now step, their footsteps dissolving into silence. Were they lost? Taken? Swallowed by the curse itself? The question lingers with every breath. What does it mean for a place to consume its people? And here, in Dudleytown, you feel the answer might not be something you want to know. The deeper you wander into Dudleytown, the more you sense a thread of madness stitched into the soil itself. You pause at the ruins of another home, its cellar hole now nothing more than a pit of shadows filled with damp leaves and moss. Locals once whispered that the family who lived here suffered from what they called the creeping insanity, a sickness not of the body, but of the mind. At first, it was small things. A farmer misplacing his tools and accusing his children of stealing. A mother insisting that strangers lingered outside her windows when no one else saw them. But soon, the whispers grew sharper. Screams in the night, fits of rage that left homes in shambles, neighbors muttering that the Dudleys and those who joined them were unraveling. You imagine standing in that cabin late at night, the candlelight flickering, hearing a loved one laugh at nothing at all, or mutter about shadows moving across the floor. How long before fear replaced trust? How long before families themselves splintered under the weight of invisible torment? One story that survives tells of a man named Gershom Hollister. He worked a farm not far from here, and neighbors said he was sturdy, reliable, sane. Until one night, something broke inside him. He staggered into a tavern in Cornwall, clothes torn, his eyes wild, insisting that dark figures had been chasing him from tree to tree. He swore he could hear them whispering his name. By morning, Gershom was dead, his body found in a ravine. Officially, it was called an accident. but the people of Cornwall called it the curse. Another tale comes from a woman whose journals were discovered years after she left Dudleytown. She wrote of hearing voices when she went to gather water, of seeing faces peering from behind the trees. She described nights when her husband would sit staring at the wall, unblinking, as if entranced by something no one else could see. Eventually, she wrote, he stopped speaking altogether. He would only hum, a low, mournful sound, until the day he vanished into the woods and never came back. It was not just one family, not just one incident. Over the decades, the pattern repeated. Farmers would lose their crops and then their reason. Wives would fall into despair. Children would whisper of figures standing at the foot of their beds. The nearby towns began to avoid the valley altogether. They said madness ran through Dudleytown like a fever, passed down through blood and through the land itself. And yet, you wonder, was it something as simple as isolation? The valley was shadowed, the soil poor, the winters long and punishing. Loneliness can gnaw at the mind, and darkness can play tricks on the eyes. But then again, how do you explain the consistency of the stories? How do you explain generation after generation, speaking of the same shadows, the same whispers, the same pull toward despair? As you stand there, the forest pressing close, you imagine how it must have felt for those settlers. To know that each winter the light would vanish earlier, the nights would stretch longer, and in the silence, your own thoughts would grow loud enough to terrify you. You picture a man staring into the fire, certain that something waits just beyond the glow, watching, patient. It wasn't only families who spoke of madness. Visitors who passed through sometimes returned with haunted eyes. A minister who once tried to bring comfort here wrote that he felt a weight of sorrow in the valley, a heaviness that followed him even after he left. A soldier marching through during the Revolutionary War claimed he heard screams echoing through the hills, though no one else in his company heard a sound. The stories piled up, layer upon layer, until Dudleytown's name became synonymous with insanity. Outsiders muttered that no one could live here for long without losing their mind. And when the last families abandoned their homes, leaving the forest to swallow the town, the reputation lingered like smoke after a fire. You take another step down the narrow trail, your breath loud in your ears, and it's easy to understand. The silence itself seems to press against you, an invisible weight. You catch yourself glancing over your shoulder more often than you'd like, wondering if perhaps the settlers weren't mad at all. Perhaps they were seeing something real, something that has simply never left. And here's the part that chills you most. Dudleytown is not gone. The land is still here, the ruins still hiding beneath moss and roots, and the stories, the whispers of madness, remain. The trail curves, and you come upon another ruin, a pile of stones collapsed in on itself, perhaps once the hearth of a cabin. You pause, leaning against a tree, and it strikes you how hearths are meant to symbolize warmth, family, survival. Yet here, these stones sit cold, toppled, abandoned, just like the lives that once flickered around them. It is here that the stories of Dudleytown's darkest tragedies seem to hang in the air. Madness and vanishings were terrible enough, but some families suffered in ways so violent, so sudden, that the tales still send shivers through anyone who hears them. Take the Carter family, for example. They came in hope of new land, settling into a small home not far from where you stand now. For a while, things seemed fine. Neighbors recalled cheerful visits, shared harvests, even laughter ringing out of the Carter cabin on summer evenings. But one winter, something changed. The father began to claim that wolves circled the house at night, though no tracks were ever found. His wife confessed to hearing crying voices in the woods, voices that sounded like children, though theirs were asleep inside. And then, one night, the family simply shattered. Neighbors found the home in chaos days later. Doors flung open, belongings overturned, and only silence inside. The parents were never seen again. The children were discovered wandering in shock, unable to explain what had happened, their words tumbling out as fragments, shadows, voices, screams. You shake your head, trying to imagine such a scene. A winter night, the fire flickering, a family huddled inside, and then a terror so overwhelming that the very walls of the house could not keep it out. Another story whispers of the Brophy family. They moved to Dudleytown with optimism, determined to farm the difficult land. But their luck soured. Crops failed, animals died, and illness swept through their children. The father, John Brophy, began to unravel. First, his wife died suddenly. Then his 3 children followed within months. Left alone in the cabin, John was said to wander the woods at night, shouting to unseen figures, begging for mercy. And then one morning, he too was gone. His cabin was found empty. His body never recovered. Standing there, you wonder how much of this was curse, and how much was just the cruelty of life in the 18th century. Farms failed everywhere. Disease took lives swiftly. But there's something about the pattern here, the way misfortune struck not once, not twice, but over and over. It begins to feel less like chance and more like intent. The strangest tragedy of all may be that of General Herman Swift, a Revolutionary War officer who retired to Dudleytown with his beloved wife. For years, they lived peacefully until the day she was struck by lightning and killed instantly outside their home. Neighbors reported that Swift was never the same. He descended into despair and madness, unable to recover from the shock, muttering constantly about fate, about curses, until his own death followed not long after. Lightning, madness, death. It was as if the valley itself could not allow peace to last, no matter who tried to build a life here. As you walk, you imagine these stories not as history, but as lives unfolding around you. You picture the Carter children standing in the snow outside their broken home, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror they cannot explain. You picture John Brophy, a lone figure stumbling through the woods, calling out to voices only he can hear. And you picture General Swift staring at the sky as thunder rolled, convinced the heavens themselves had cursed him. Each tragedy might be dismissed, explained away on its own, but together they form a tapestry too heavy to ignore. Dudleytown became a place where sorrow was not an exception, but the rule. Where laughter seemed destined to turn to screams. And as you linger in the shadow of these ruins, you begin to feel that maybe it wasn't just bad luck, or poor soil, or harsh winters. Maybe Dudleytown was never meant to hold life. Maybe the valley itself hungers, feeding on despair, ensuring that anyone who dares to settle here leaves behind only ruin and a whisper in the trees. You take a long breath, trying to steady yourself, but the air feels colder now, as though the tragedies themselves are still alive, echoing through the stones at your feet. The path winds deeper, and you notice how the trees seem older here, their trunks twisted as if bent beneath centuries of storms. The canopy is so thick that daylight barely filters through, and for a moment, you feel as though you've stepped into a different world altogether, one cut off from time where the ordinary rules of life don't quite apply. It's in this suffocating stillness that the paranormal sightings of Dudleytown begin to stir. For decades after the town was abandoned, wanderers and thrill-seekers who ventured into these woods claimed they didn't just feel fear, they saw it. The most common report? Shadows. Not just the play of light and leaves, but figures darker than the night itself. Hikers have sworn that black silhouettes followed them, moving just beyond clear sight. Some describe the shapes darting from tree to tree, never close enough to confront, but always present, always watching. You imagine standing in the center of the forest at dusk, the air cool and damp, when you notice a darker blot in the corner of your vision. You turn, but it vanishes. Then another flickers across your path, silent, formless, but unmistakably there. Your chest tightens because the forest is no longer empty. Others speak of glowing orbs drifting through the trees, pale blue or white lights that hover at a distance and then disappear without a sound. Some swear the orbs followed them, bobbing gently like lanterns, only to wink out the moment they turned their heads. Skeptics call it swamp gas, or tricks of the eyes in dim light. But those who have seen them insist it felt like something intelligent, something curious, perhaps even luring them deeper. And then there are the voices, low murmurs rising from nowhere. Whispers that seem to curl around your ears though you are entirely alone. More than one person has bolted from the woods swearing they heard their own name whispered in the dark. The strangest accounts, though, come from those who claim they lost time. Visitors describe entering the forest in broad daylight, only to stumble out hours later with no sense of where they'd been. Watches seemed to stop working, and compasses spun without reason. One hiker swore he had only walked 10 minutes, yet when he returned to his car, the sun had already set. His friends had been waiting for hours, convinced he'd disappeared. Perhaps most chilling are the claims of apparitions, figures dressed in colonial clothing wandering the ruins. A woman in a bonnet seen moving through the trees. A man with a musket standing near the remains of a stone wall. Some witnesses even say the apparitions turn to look at them before vanishing. You stop for a moment and close your eyes, trying to picture it. A fog rolling low across the forest floor, and through it, the vague outline of a settler's face staring back at you with hollow eyes. The past bleeding into the present, refusing to let go. The paranormal stories aren't just isolated rumors. They've stacked up across decades, told by hikers, locals, even paranormal investigators who dared to test the legends. Equipment malfunctions, photographs filled with unexplained streaks of light, recordings of faint voices in the static. For every skeptic who dismisses it, there's another story from someone who swears they'll never set foot in Dudleytown again. You continue walking, your footsteps crunching softly, and you realize that the real power of Dudleytown's hauntings isn't just in what seen, it's in what felt. That crushing weight on your chest, the prickling at the back of your neck, the sense that every step is observed. It's the same dread that settlers must have felt, the same unease that never let them rest. And as the forest thickens, you can help but feel the same question they must have asked. Are the shadows just tricks of the mind? Or are you right now sharing this valley with something ancient, unseen, and terribly patient? The silence stretches, heavy and absolute, and suddenly you wish you weren't here alone. You keep moving, though each step feels like trespassing on something sacred or cursed. The path narrows, weaving between boulders, and ahead the forest floor dips into a clearing. It's here that the strangest threads of Dudleytown's legacy emerge, the theories of why this place carries such darkness. Everyone seems to have an explanation, but none of them agree. Some say the curse began in England, with the Dudley family long before they ever set foot in Connecticut. According to legend, Edmund Dudley, an ancestor tied to the court of Henry VIII, was executed for treason. His family, they say, was marked by misfortune from that day on. Madness, ruin, death. They followed the bloodline across the sea, landing here in this valley where the Dudleys tried to start anew. Perhaps they carried more than just their belongings. Perhaps they carried a curse. Others argue the valley itself is poisoned, not with spirits, but with nature. The soil is thin and poor, rocky and unforgiving. Some scientists have suggested that high levels of certain minerals in the ground could affect crops, animals, and even human health. Inhaling mold spores or drinking from tainted water sources could cause hallucinations, paranoia, sickness. Maybe what settlers called a curse was simply a natural toxin they never understood. But the theories don't stop there. Some believe Dudleytown sits on a ley line, one of those invisible currents of energy said to snake across the earth. Where ley lines intersect, strange phenomena supposedly thrive. Hauntings, apparitions, unexplained lights. Was this valley chosen not by chance, but by its geography? Did the settlers unknowingly build their homes on a fault line of energy, dooming themselves to encounter whatever moves along it? And then, of course, there are the whispers of something far older. The native peoples who once traveled these lands rarely settled in this valley. To them, It was a place of shadows, avoided rather than embraced. Some stories suggest they believed evil spirits dwelled here, waiting for the reckless to wander too far. Was the curse not imported from England at all, but already rooted in the soil long before the first cabin rose? As you linger in the clearing, you turn each theory over in your mind. A family curse, poisoned land, mystical energies, ancient spirits. Each explanation fits one piece of the puzzle, but none explain it all. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Dudleytown is the kind of mystery that resists being solved. You think of the vanishings, the madness, the tragedies, the apparitions. Could all of it really be reduced to bad farming conditions and harsh winters? Or is there something more sinister, something invisible that feeds on those who dare to settle here? The forest seems to lean in closer now, as if listening to your thoughts. A breeze stirs, carrying with it a faint rustle that sounds almost like a voice. You freeze, listening, heart thudding. It fades, leaving only silence. But you can't shake the feeling that the valley doesn't like being dissected, doesn't like being theorized about. You shift your weight, uneasy, and realize that's what makes Dudleytown so powerful. Explanations only deepen the mystery. Each theory leaves gaps, and into those gaps, fear seeps like water into cracks in stone. The settlers tried to make sense of it. The neighbors who watched them vanish tried to make sense of it. And now you, centuries later, stand in the same valley with the same unanswered questions. The clearing is still. The ruins around you crumble quietly. But in your mind, possibilities swarm. Curses, toxins, energy, spirits, and none of them bring comfort. The trail bends one last time, leading you toward the heart of Dudleytown, the place most people never reach. Here the ruins are more pronounced, the stone walls higher, the cellar holes deeper, as if the earth itself has preserved the scars of human presence. You stop and let your eyes wander, imagining the town at its peak. Smoke curling from chimneys, children chasing each other through the fields, voices carrying across the valley. Now, all that remains is silence. This is where the modern legends begin. The stories carried not by settlers, but by hikers, paranormal investigators, and thrill-seekers who dared to come searching for answers. The town may be long abandoned, but its reputation has only grown, and the encounters people claim here are enough to make you pause before taking another step. Some who wander these ruins insist they've felt hands brushing against them, invisible but undeniable. Others say they've seen faces peering from cellar holes, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Photographs taken here often show streaks of light, orbs, or shapes that shouldn't be there. Skeptics laugh, call it lens flare or tricks of the camera. But the people who took the photos swear what they saw, and what they felt, was real. Then there are the reports of sudden panic, a suffocating terror that grips visitors without warning. Perfectly rational hikers find themselves sprinting out of the valley, hearts hammering, unable to explain what frightened them. Later, they'll admit they felt watched, surrounded, as if the forest itself wanted them gone. Paranormal investigators have brought equipment, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders, and many left with strange results. Recordings filled with static and faint whispers. Temperature drops so sharp the breath fogged instantly, even in summer. Batteries drained in minutes, cameras flickering off just as something strange moved in the corner of the frame. And yet, despite all this, Dudleytown is not a tourist attraction. The land is privately owned, strictly off-limits, patrolled to keep curious thrill-seekers away. Some say it's to protect the forest. Others insist it's to protect you. You stand among the ruins, and it strikes you how unusual that is. Most ghost towns welcome visitors, turning tragedy into history. But not here. Here, the gates are locked, the signs warn you off, and the stories trickle out only from those who trespass. Almost as if the town itself wants its secrets preserved. And that perhaps is the final twist of Dudleytown's legend. Its mysteries remain not just because they're unsolved, but because they're hidden, cloaked in silence, kept just out of reach. You can't study it in detail, can't walk freely among the ruins, can't test every theory. All you can do is listen to the whispers of history, to the stories of those who vanished, to the echoes of those who dared to come here after. The valley stands before you, vast and quiet, and you realize that Dudleytown is more than a ghost town. It's a riddle without an answer, a story without an ending, a place where questions multiply the closer you come. You take a final breath of the cool, heavy air. Somewhere in the distance, a crow calls, its cry sharp against the silence. You turn back down the path, carrying the weight of everything you've heard, everything you've imagined. The story of Dudleytown will follow you, lingering in the back of your mind long after you've left. And as you leave the valley behind, one thought presses hardest of all. Dudleytown may be abandoned, but perhaps it was never truly empty. So, if this story made you shiver just a little, or if you found yourself glancing over your shoulder once or twice, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who loves a good mystery, and subscribe for more journeys into the world's strangest unsolved tales. Who knows where we'll wander next?